Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Welcome back to the series of videos devoted to Svend Brinkmann's book, Qualitative Inquiry in Everyday Life. Only two more parts to go. So this is part 10. And after this, we're going to talk briefly about the final concluding chapter. So we are still on chapter 8, which is about books of fiction. After that, we have one chapter left, chapter 9, on quality. Okay, so let's turn to the flashcards. Is based on the second half of chapter 8. And chapter 8, as you might recall, was about works of fiction. How works of fiction, novels, short stories, could be used as research material for qualitative researchers in the humanities and social science, human sciences. Okay, so we're continuing that. We're continuing the discussion of fiction in understanding society and in social sciences in general, social research. And then in this chapter, in the second half of chapter 8, Brinkmann also is going to talk about an author that is important to him, very significant to him for his sociological analysis, and that is French writer Michel Houellebecq. So let's dive in. Let's get into that second half of chapter 8. We read in her fine book on narratives in social science research, Charinowska argues that plot is the means by which events are brought into one meaningful whole. So why narrative is important? Because it has a unifying organizing role. It has an organizing function. But narratives themselves are not necessary, he argues. He goes on to say that instead of narratives, we can have something else, and that is the lyrical style. And the lyricism, the lyrical style of writing fiction focuses instead of how events unfold one after another, instead it focuses on individual episodes and delves into them, lingers in them, in those episodes. So we read, unlike this integrationist and explanatory use of narratives, oh yes, narratives are also useful for understanding cause and effect. Unlike that, lyrical writers are able to create experiences of events without plot, of that which defies explanation, which seem to characterize much of the postmodern world. So that's the fragmentary nature of the postmodern world. Brinkmann tells us that fragmentary nature of the postmodern world is reflected in the fragmentary nature of postmodern fiction writing. I wish to present one main contender in the field of lyrical social science by addressing the work of the contemporary French novelist Michel Houellebecq. Both Houellebecq's style of writing and the themes that he writes about warrant a characterization of him as a lyrical sociologist. Houellebecq is a writer of fiction who, in my view, enables his reader to gain a deep yet non-narrative understanding of contemporary social life. In addition to playing with the boundaries between autobiography and fiction, Houellebecq also plays with those between literary and scientific writing. His books are full of references to the social sciences, especially sociology, with a favorite thinker being Auguste Comte. So with references to sociologists and scientific positivist thinkers, Houellebecq indicates that, yes, I'm writing a work of fiction, but I have my eye on some scientific target as well. I also have, an underlying mission to understand and reveal something about the nature of society, the nature of our time. In line with the classical positivist approach, Houellebecq's style of writing is objectivist, sociological, behaviorist, and starkly anti-psychological. At the same time, however, it is strangely moving. Like social scientists, Houellebecq even conducts fictitious sociological experiments through his writing. What does he mean by, behaviorist, not anti-psychological? It means that he is not concerned with the inner life, the interior life of his characters. He doesn't talk as much about what is going on internally, the internal monologue, the internal thought processes. Instead, he pays more attention to the situation, to what is outside of the characters. So some of his findings, Houellebecq's findings, some of his observations, some of his conclusions, when nothing is sacred, he's talking about our society. When nothing is sacred, human relations become an exchange of goods, where good relationships are those that maximize individuals' capacities to have pleasant and intense experiences, particularly concerning sex. The main theme for Houellebecq thus becomes the total marketization of human life in consumer society. The chronicler, the narrator, in the book titled Whatever, presents the sociological analysis that in societies like ours, sex truly represents a second system of differentiation, completely independent of money. And as a system of differentiation, it functions quite as mercilessly. I think the system of differentiation is like a system of valuing, a system of evaluation, and a system of organizing people in terms of a hierarchy, ranking people. So just like how we can ask how rich someone is, how poor someone is, we can also ask completely independently, according to Houellebecq, how attractive someone is, what is their value in the sexual marketplace. Another aspect of this kind of society is that life becomes about isolated episodes of hedonistic pursuits or hedonistic intake, hedonistic experiences. We are no longer living a grand narrative, according to a grand narrative. We are not living moral lives according to some transcendent values. So our lives becomes about episodes, isolated episodes, fragmentary episodes. So we continue to read, a life under postmodern conditions is thus not depicted as a narrative, but consists of different situations that follow one another, which in consequence cannot truthfully be represented in a narrative form. This explains why Houellebecq writes like a lyrical sociologist. So his lyricism is a representational practice. This explains why Houellebecq writes like a lyrical sociologist who seeks to invoke emotions rather than a narrative writer who provides explanatory links between events. In addition, the body plays a specific role in the lives of Houellebecqian characters. Their identities are defined not only in social and commercial terms, but also in bodily rather than psychological terms. It is how their bodies look, move, dress, and suffer that define them as persons and constitute their identities. This line is about the impact of his writing. One is moved by the emotional qualities of Houellebecq's descriptions of social situations, not by narrative. I believe that Houellebecq's writings contain precise sociological descriptions of central aspects of human life in postmodern consumer society. In this sense, we can read his works as literary and indeed lyrical sociology. Although I am moved by Houellebecq's aesthetic lyricism, I also believe we should be critical of his sociology. First and foremost, his descriptions and conservative judgments of the postmodern as consumerist are hyperbolic and one-sided. The existential figure of the tourist, for example, so he describes human beings as tourists rather than people who belong, rooted, could be redescribed contra Houellebecq to include some positive sides that he does not touch upon, such as openness, curiosity, tolerance, and a willingness to learn from otherness. Now he is taking a step back and talking about what style of social research is Houellebecq's qualitative work. My reading of Houellebecq as a qualitative researcher is probably closest to the strategy of making the obvious, the phenomenological stance. His books do not deconstruct or criticize, but aim for clear descriptions of human life under specific historical circumstances. The very arguments that literature can be qualitative research, however, is probably closer to making the obvious dubious, since it destabilizes or even breaks down conventional understandings of the dichotomy of art, fiction, and research fact. Okay, relatively shorter video, but we are making progress and almost at the end of this book. Thank you very much for your attention, for your support, and I look forward to the next part in which we conclude the book. All right, take care, guys.